hello class. I'm here in the Seattle airport, and I thought I would briefly say hello to you all and touch base with how we're doing this week. I wanted to kind of close the loop a little bit on our discussion about Joshua and Moses, and particularly Joshua's relationship to Jesus. I did mention in the class, it bears repeating, that in both the Hebrew and the Greek, the Hebrew being Yeshua, the Greek being Jesus, both men have the same name, and indeed, when you see the account of what Jesus did in like Hebrews chapter 3 and 4, when the author talks about what Jesus accomplished, it's a little ambiguous, and for a couple things he says, whether he's talking about Joshua or Jesus. So there is a little bit of a relationship there. So those are some obvious things. Now, a couple things are less obvious. I wanted to mention. George mentioned this, I think, in the comments, and I wanted to kind of expand on this. If you remember in Deuteronomy, and I think I called attention to this in a lesson, this is probably a passage in the Old Testament you should know. In Deuteronomy 18:15 through 18, the text promises that there will be a prophet like Moses. Moses here is speaking of a prophet like himself who, unlike Moses, the people will actually obey. And, that prophet will achieve what Moses didn't. Now, what's interesting is, from the point of view of the Old Testament, we might ask, well, who is this prophet? Who's going to arise after Moses? Well, the most obvious character, of course, is Joshua, because Joshua is Moses, basically his handpicked successor. So, of course, what's interesting, though, as time goes on and the blessings that Joshua achieved for Israel have been lost, there's kind of in the air, along with the general sort of hope of the Messianic age, the hope of a Davidic figure returning, that there's also this question, well, will there be some other prophet who will more fully fulfill the role of Moses, unlike Moses himself? And so you have that kind of expectation in the air. And so, for instance, in the baptism of the Lord sequence that you have in the Gospel of John chapter 1, there's this discussion, and the Pharisees asked John the Baptist, "Are you that prophet?" Now, who's that prophet? Well, that prophet will be the prophet that we're talking about in Deuteronomy 18, chapter 15 through 18. Okay, so there's that. There is this notion of that prophet in the air. Now, how does that connect Jesus with Joshua? Well, as I just mentioned, Moses picked Joshua as his successor. If you go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 31, and it's not exactly clear where this happens, but it seems to be around Mount Ebal, which is basically, we're led to believe, right sort of on the edge of the entrance to the Holy Land from the side of the Transjordan. So this is basically right at the edge. Moses is, of course, not allowed to enter the Holy Land, but Joshua will be. And so Moses makes Joshua his successor right in the vicinity of the River Jordan. And of course, this becomes a kind of a literary type scene for the idea of a prophetic commissioning, where a prophet chooses his successor who will carry on his mission. And we see this one other time in the Old Testament. To my knowledge, it's where Elijah, this is in 2 Kings chapter 1 and 2, chooses his successor, Elisha. And this also happens in the River Jordan, and it involves the appearance of the Holy Spirit. And of course, after this happens, Elisha's picked. Elijah gets caught up in the chariots of fire and the famous scene there. And of course, the baptismal sequence in the Gospels, where Jesus gets baptized by John, is also playing on this expectation, where the Lord comes to John the Baptist to be baptized. There is a sense in which John the Baptist, as many people say, is the last of the Old Testament prophets, and in effect, Jesus is now becoming the successor to John to, in effect, complete his mission. Now, there's a little bit of a theological problem with that, and that would seem to make John the larger figure in that arrangement, and that's one of the reasons why the Gospel of Matthew, just has a conversation between the two of them. It makes absolutely clear, no, it's really Jesus who's the greater figure here, even though Jesus is nevertheless, taking the baton, as it were, from John the Baptist. So just as Moses passed to Joshua, Elijah passed to Elisha, John the Baptist passes to Jesus, they both are the prophetic successors to another prophet as well. And that's another way in which Joshua and Jesus are related. Okay? So they each lead their people into the Holy Land. In a way of speaking with Jesus, and literally the case with Joshua. Okay, so let's stop there, and I will look forward this week to what you all are finding about Deuteronomy and its treatment of the Judahite monarchy. It's fascinating to me that you would expect the text to be much, much more pro-monarchical than it really is. And I think it bears some examination of the ways in which it really shows us that, that despite, the fact that the prophets who put together the Deuteronomic history, the Deuteronomistic history, were funded and supported by the king. Without the royalty, there would have been no prophetic class to put together the Bible, the historical books of the Bible. Nevertheless, they're actually tacitly very critical of the monarchy and its institution, or at the very least very ambiguous about whether it's a good idea or not. And that's what I wanted to talk about this week, at least for the first part. So if you could, maybe post on that in the next couple days, and I will look forward to seeing you then. Okay, bye.